You want to know how a war with an HOA president actually goes? Well, I'll tell you right now as you're watching this, a woman named Carol Henderson is standing in my backyard grinning like she just won the lottery, personally directing the trucks that are draining my father's $30,000 pond while I'm 5,000 miles away in Tel Aviv. I see it all live on my security camera feed, her smug face waving at the lens, acting like she's the queen of the cul-de-sac, convinced she's finally beaten us. What she doesn't know is my crew's been gathering receipts on her for months, and her precious $50 million bridge deal. Yeah, we're about to pull the plug on it live at the next city council meeting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind a bit, because if you want to understand how we got here, you got to know who Carol Henderson really is. She's about 5'2", but you'd swear her shadow stretches halfway across the county. She once fined Mrs. Johnson, an 85-year-old widow, $500 because her grass was an inch too high. When Mrs. Johnson tried to explain her arthritis makes yard work nearly impossible, Carol hit her with that ice-cold smile and goes, "Rules are rules." Maybe it's time you consider assisted living. The poor woman broke down crying right there on her porch, but Carol just clipped down the steps and moved on to her next victim. That same week, she forced a 78-year-old vet to sell his house because his service dog barked twice. She called it excessive noise pollution, threatened him with 10 grand in fines, and pretty soon the man packed up and moved away. It didn't matter if you were disabled, grieving, or just trying to live your life. If Carol decided you broke a rule, your days were numbered. She fined a family with an autistic son for disruptive behavior after the boy had a meltdown in his own backyard. She got a food truck run by a disabled veteran shut down because she claimed the smell of tacos lowered property values. Every Monday, she'd strut around the neighborhood with her clipboard measuring grass height, with a ruler checking mailbox angles, with a level snapping photos of violations like she was running a forensics lab. Folks got so scared to step out of line that nobody put their trash cans out early or let their kids draw chalk on the driveway. What nobody realized was just how far Carol was willing to go when her greed or ego was on the line. The morning I left for Israel, I sat by the pond my dad built by hand 30 years ago. A masterpiece, honestly, with a Japanese filtration system, LED lighting, and an oxygenation rig that kept everything in perfect balance. It was my dad's pride and joy, and last year I'd buried a waterproof box near the north edge, filled with his medals from Vietnam, old photos, and a letter he wrote before he passed. That pond wasn't just water, it was memory, legacy. Everything good my dad left behind. "I'll be back soon, Dad," I said, running my hand along the stones he'd chosen himself. That's when Carol showed up, uninvited as always, peering through my gate with that predatory look. "Going somewhere, Jake?" she asked, her pen ready to pounce. 3 weeks in Israel, I shot back security consulting. Try not to burn the neighborhood down while I'm gone. She ignored the jab, focused on the pond. I've been reviewing HOA bylaws, code 247.3, water features and insurance premiums. I almost laughed. "That code doesn't exist, Carol." She just smiled and whispered, "It will by the time you get back. Enjoy your trip, Jake. I'll be watching your property closely." There was nothing I could do. I had a flight to catch and a job to do. Fast forward 2 days. I'm halfway through a meeting with a cybersecurity firm in Tel Aviv when my phone goes off. First one alert, then another, then 5 in a row. I duck out onto the balcony and pull up my security app. There she is in real time, orchestrating a full demolition crew, pump trucks, excavators, everything tearing into my backyard. "Drain it completely," she tells them, "and dig here." She points right at the spot where my father's memorial box is buried. I hear the crew hesitating. "Ma'am, this is private property." She cuts them off. "I am the HOA president. I am the law in this neighborhood. Now dig." That was it. I called my best friend Mike, who, lucky for me, is also a lawyer. Code red man. "Carol's destroying Dad's pond. Get whatever you can. Meet me at the airport." The flight home was the longest 12 hours of my life. I kept replaying the security footage, watching her cold and methodical as they ripped out every bit of my dad's work. The next morning, I was back, standing ankle-deep in mud where my father's pride and joy had been. The filtration system was gone. The rocks were scattered. The koi were dead. The memorial box vanished. 30 years of love gone in a matter of hours. I didn't even have time to mourn before Carol showed up looking like she'd just won an Oscar. "You're back early," she said, all fake concern. "We addressed the code violation. You'll get the bill, of course." I asked about my dad's metals. She shrugged, feigning ignorance. If you left valuables in a construction zone, that's not my responsibility. Then she hits me with this: the emergency HOA meeting next week will be introducing new regulations about memorial displays. Some people just can't let go of the past. I wanted to lose it, but all I could do was call Mike and tell him to meet me at Murphy's bar. At Murphy's, the squad assembled. Tony, who runs a construction company, slid in first, face red with anger. She destroyed my life too, man. Fined me over a truck parked 2 inches over the line, cost me $500,000. Then Sarah, ex-HOA board member and retired accountant, leaned in. She forced me out when I asked too many questions about the HOA finances. Changed the bylaws so she could spend up to $50,000 with no approval. Then she dropped the bomb. Carol and her husband had sunk everything into a $50 million bridge project, even borrowed from some questionable folks. If that deal fails, they lose everything. That's when the light bulb went off. Tony's company had been asked to bid on the bridge. Mike's firm handled investment. Sarah still had admin access to some HOA email accounts. Me, I started digging into Carol's public statements, catching every time she bragged a little too loud. Piece by piece, it all came together. Carol and her husband were running shell companies, pumping up prices on the bridge contract, funneling city money to their own pockets. We found companies registered to her dead mother's house bids inflated by 300%, and evidence of payments to what looked a whole lot like the Russian construction mob. Suddenly things got ugly, threatening calls dead fish on my doorstep. Tony's work truck sabotaged. Someone even tried to grab Sarah's research binder in a parking garage, but she pepper sprayed the guy and made it out okay. If anything, it just made us more determined. More neighbors stepped up. Old Mrs. Johnson with a stack of bogus fines, the veteran with recordings of Carol's threats, the family with the autistic son, and every nasty letter Carol ever sent them. Our little squad became an army. The day of the city council meeting was like the Super Bowl for local politics. The chamber was packed, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Carol sat front and center, decked out in her power suit, flanked by muscle that looked straight out of a gangster movie. When the bridge project came up, Mike stood up, legal bombshell in hand, and announced his firm was pulling out because of systematic fraud. The room lost its mind. Tony and Sarah rolled out a presentation with side-by-side contract quotes proving the fraud in black and white. I played a recording of Carol bragging at a party about how the Russians guaranteed support as long as the money keeps flowing, and Jake Bennett's pond was just an easy $30,000 to kickstart the deal. Then the FBI walked in. "Nobody leaves this room," the agent announced. They'd been watching for months and now had warrants in hand. Carol tried to point fingers at me, at Tony, at anyone, until the FBI agent just looked at her and said, "Ma'am, theft isn't enforcement. It's a crime." The news spread like wildfire. The bridge deal collapsed overnight, the city became a media circus, and Carol's reign was done. Sarah took over as HOA president, reversed every bogus fine, and put in new transparency rules. Carol's husband rolled over in court. The Russians skipped town, and Carol herself tried every trick in the book, countersued, claimed coercion, even tried to run for the border, but in the end the jury only needed 2 hours guilty on all counts. The day we rebuilt my dad's pond using money clawed back from Carol's assets was the first time the neighborhood really felt like a community again. Neighbors who'd never spoken before showed up to help plant flowers and set stones. We raised a toast to my father, to everyone who stood up for what was right, and maybe just as important, to each other. We proved that a handful of regular folks could take down extraordinary corruption, and if you're fighting your own HOA nightmare, you're not alone. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to say enough. So what do you think? Was justice really served, or do you see it another way? Drop your take below. Tell me if you've ever tangled with an HOA tyrant, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real-world drama where karma always gets the last word.